Welcome back to the Be Free Show, to our episode on romantic relationships, part 2. Yes. I'm Annice, and this is my good friend, Ali.
Hey, y'all.
And we're going to jump right into our key points, which is number 1, when we rush into a relationship, we're not practicing self-love. Yep. That's from last season. Number 2, when lust drives us, our destination is a dead-end relationship. And number 3, when our happiness depends on a partner, we're selling ourselves short.
Yeah, so you heard us say it in previous episodes. Last season was about telling you in 5 minutes what we thought about these topics.
Right.
We've gotten some feedback on this episode on romantic relationships, a lot of positive testimonies, a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. And so let's just take the opportunity, Annice, to wherever we feel like we want to say a little more about each of these 3 points, and then we'll build on that from there. So is there anything that you want to build on from these 3 points that you feel like is really important for our audience to know?
Yeah, so connected to this first point, the idea of when you rush into a relationship, you're not practicing self-love. Yeah. Some of the feedback that we got is a desire for people to unpack, for people to have us to unpack. What do you mean rushing into a relationship? What if I meet somebody and I really like the person, I feel a strong draw and connection to them? How is that not practicing self-love?
Right.
And so for me, it made me think about, when you know your worth and your value as a person, you take the time to get to know who that person is. Right. There isn't a rush. The person isn't going, anywhere. You take the time to, as we talked about in the first season, like you get to know the depths of a person's soul. Right. And, there's a joke amongst my friends and I is that when you're getting to know somebody, it's their representative for the first 3 months, right? You're just kind of getting to know who they are. And then after the 3rd month, people begin to release that, that extra layer that we put on because we want people to like us, to care about us. And that's when you start to get to know, who the person is.
And of course, the 3 months is just kind of like an idea.
Yeah,
it could be a various length of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, though. That's something my mom always preaches, is just allow whatever it is to pass the test of time. Mm-hmm. And I know she really believes strongly in this because she'll say it long before any of us are even in a relationship. We won't even have a love interest in our lives. Right. But if the topic comes up, my mom will say, the best foolproof sort of way to know if this is the right thing is allow it to go through that test of time. Mm-hmm. Really peeling back those layers, like you said, and getting to know the depths of a person reveals whether this person is truly compatible with you. And it makes me think about, we brought up the sermon, 5 Keys to Identifying Your Soulmate by Pastor Teray Roberts. Right. Such a powerful resource. And one of the most beautiful things he highlights in there is if it's truly real, then you can say to God, I release this person. Mm-hmm. If this person's truly meant for me, I have the faith to release this person back to you. And in a sense, it's making your heart posture one in which you say to God, I'm not trying to take control of this process. You're in control of this process. I believe in soulmates. I believe you're bringing us two together. And so I'm going to release this person. You'll bring it together if it should be.
Yeah, and I like that concept of releasing. And that was a point that stood out to me as well in Pastor Teray's sermon, because it goes back to your value and your worth, right? Because if you believe that there is someone in the world to match you, there's someone in the world who will not fulfill you, but someone who God will bring towards you in your life, then you know that you are already valuable, you know that you're already worthy, and you don't have to spend all this time trying to prove that to a particular person. So that's what it means to know your value and your worth. Yes. It's to trust the test of time that your value and worth won't diminish with the person, right? That you can actually prolong that and actually get to know someone. And I think it helps you build a strong foundation on friendships, which we talked about already during this season. The basis to me of any strong romantic relationship is a core and solid friendship.
Yeah. And I know there's at least one viewer out there, if not a lot more, who says, or thinks, well, I don't actually even believe in this idea of soulmates. I don't believe there's one person that, God has destined for us to be with. I do. I think you do. Now, that isn't to say, there are instances where, people pass away. God may intend for you to marry again or meet another person. I'm not saying there's no exceptions, but I do believe in the notion of soulmates. And I'll say this, if you don't, I'd like to offer to you that it may be worth trying on that perspective, trying on that framework for a bit, and seeing how it might shift your thinking, shift your approach to relationships. What it might do is elevate or raise up for you, some internal work that you may be having to do because you've given up or you've been hurt, or past scars are starting to shape the way you see what's possible.
Yeah, and I think it connects a lot to what we were talking about in our first point, which is not rushing into a relationship, right? Because part of the rush, I think, is because you feel like the person's gonna run away, or they're not gonna be there. I know I felt that way. Is that like, if what if it doesn't work out, or what if the person leaves, and it just kind of goes back to taking it slow. And I think what could be underneath that is our second point, which is this idea of like, when lust drives you, your destination is a dead-end relationship.
Yeah.
And I know we came out the gate really strong with that. I mean, I remember saying dead-end relationship because I think I've had experience with it, you've had experience with it, I'm sure we polled our friends. We would hear that people, when they were sort of being driven by only the physical nature of things, it distracted us from the whole person, right? We may not have recognized a representative that we were getting to know because we were being so driven by the physical.
Right.
And for me, we talked about the weight in season 1, and that's been something that's near and dear to me and to you as well.
Yeah.
But that process of just working on yourself, becoming the best version of yourself, to me really helped me get to know people, the full nature of who that person is, without the distractions of sex or physical intimacy, which I think can sometimes take the place when you're peeling back all those different layers and you run into conflict.
Yeah. I think I've shared part of my journey, part of my testimony, choosing to become celibate. One of the biggest journeys I've been on is learning to be more compassionate with men. And I think I'm in the place now, having been in a place where lust drove me for a season of my life, and then stepping out of that to realize the ways in which it created toxicity, and then looking out at large at society and the way men are so hypersexualized in our society. I think we're all hypersexualized, but men especially. And then really starting to say, God, men really are dogs, right? But then taking a step back from that and saying, wait a minute, we're products of our environment, we're products of the media, and that's not to excuse, hypersexual or misogynistic behavior or any of that, because it's not excusable, right? But to have more compassion, to see that men are actually suffering themselves when they get into a toxic pattern of going in and out of relationships driven by lust, getting soul tied to women or to men, and having to deal with the trauma and the consequences of just being in that cycle. It's very harmful. It takes us off path from our true purpose and from the opportunity to build true friendships and eventually find the right partner that we're supposed to spend our lives with.
Yeah, that deeply resonates with me, this idea of not making men the only person that's driven by lust, or not making women the quote-unquote victims of being driven by lust, but just what I'm taking from that is that we are products of our environment, and depending on the environment that you were in or how you consume media, you can't be driven by lust. You can be driven by this need to have this desire to fill you, which is a desire of emptiness, which we know only you can fill yourself. When you take that time to truly get to know yourself and know what you love, and be in the best version of who you can possibly be for somebody else. And for me, the process of the weight has helped me to do that. I would say the second thing that's really that I've been focusing more on is that, I chose to be abstinent. That's been something that has been really important to me, that I knew I didn't want to have intercourse with anybody that wasn't my husband. Now, prior to me starting to read the weight, I was participating in, sexual behaviors, which to me was like it started to become a disconnect in my own spiritual beliefs and where I was at, and where I wanted to go with truly trying to be at a place where I was fully the woman I wanted to be, but also preserving what I felt I wanted to be, which was purity in whoever, God sent me, to marry.
Yeah.
And when I stopped allowing that sort of sexual piece to be a part of my connection to men, it totally transformed my life.
Yeah.
And, I really accredited you sharing the weight with me as a part of understanding, and really, and the 5 keys as a part of understanding the process of wholeness and working on yourself, and letting that be, your sole focus.
Yeah, one of the most powerful concepts in wholeness is this idea that 2 halves don't make a whole.
Right.
And that optimal relationships are when we're truly on that journey of wholeness, and 2 people who are on that journey come together to create something, magical. Now, the opposite of purity is impurity. And I know from our relationships that you have a more nuanced perspective on this. And so the woman out there who, obviously you're not saying that, because you wanted to protect that more pure part of yourself, or God, wanting to you to be more pure in that fashion. What does that mean for women who are out there, who are engaged in sexual behavior in terms of that purity piece?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you raised that point, because I don't want to create a distinction of like, I'm pure and this person isn't pure, because technically a person would tell me that I don't really have the title. I shouldn't really be saying that I want purity or that I am being pure, because I was participating in sexual behaviors, right? And so for me, it's not a matter of good or bad. It's a matter of wanting to make sure that most intimate part of me is with the person who I'm going to spend the rest of my life with.
Yeah.
And that, we can make that choice at any point. As I said before, in my mind was like, oh, I'm abstinent, but I'm going to do these other things, right? It didn't work for me. I realized that I wasn't entering into relationships from a healthy perspective. I also realized too that like I wasn't being true to my own faith and my own background and the type of woman I wanted to be.
Right.
So I say all that to say any person can make the choice and say, you know what? I actually just want to take some time to work on myself.
Yeah.
Because I recognize that, sex and intimacy clouds things. It clouds my judgment, and I just want to get to know the depths of a person's soul and truly know the good, the bad, and the ugly, is what I like to call it. And let that be my focus from right now. And just try it on and see the difference it'll make and getting to develop a deep intimacy with someone.
Absolutely. And The Weight is such an incredible tool for that. It's a book I read at a time where I really needed to read it. I had come out of my last long-term relationship and felt like I had purposed that relationship in the wrong way. I took what should have been a lifelong, beautiful friendship, and we allowed it to become something it shouldn't have. And The Weight gave me the spiritual tools. It gave me the way to think about what does it mean to really get to know somebody the right way by removing that physical intimacy piece, focusing on this vertical relationship with God, and becoming the best version of yourself. We talked about this in season 1, but some of you may be at a time where you could really use a resource like that. Some of you may be read out, as in you've read all types of these books, you've watched the sermons, and I would say I'm in that place where it's really just time for me now to stop even thinking about this stuff. I'm at a place where I've healed from the mistakes that I've made, from the failures I've made in the area of romantic relationships. And, one friend asked me, and this is something I really want to talk about. One friend asked me, aren't you both single? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, then what? And he's like, I'm just playing, devil's advocate. I'm not saying this in a mean way, but what would qualify you two to talk about romantic relationships if you're both single? I'm like, that's an excellent question. I'm glad you brought it up, because I want to say to our viewers, we're actually uniquely qualified to talk about the way romantic relationships, the way we're talking about it, exactly. Which is that we believe, right, without any prospect in our life, that God has somebody out there for us. Right. And I believe God has the perfect person for me, right? That doesn't mean our relationship's going to be perfect. We're going to have to make compromises. All that real stuff I'm sure will happen, right? But that God has a ordained person, and me and her will meet each other at some point, and that conviction that I have and the ability to talk about the failures I've made and why I'm now choosing to practice the weight and practice celibacy, I think is really important for people to hear.
Yeah, and I think, for me, it's like a healthy balance between like how much of this singleness material that you consume, because I think at some point it can become, in many ways, idolic. It can become sort of a god, because in a way for you to make yourself feel less anxious or less worried about being single. And so I think for me it's these resources are very important. They've helped me get to where I am right now. But like my whole focus right now, personally, is just on being whole, being the best version of myself, working through all those skeletons that are in the closet that could literally destroy a relationship if I don't start to unpack and peel back those layers. Yeah. And for me, knowing that that I will get married, and like I posed a specific question to God, am I going to get married? I got a very clear answer of yes. So then I'm resting with that yes and knowing that that's going to be my story. But right now I need to focus on this vertical relationship with God so that I can be the best version of myself in the world. Not necessarily for that person, but just the best version of Annice that's operating in this world. So then, you know, when that time comes for when I'm, you know, going to be walking down the aisle, I feel like at least I'm bringing a more whole version of myself into this situation.
Exactly. If you're out there and you're watching this, a lot of you, and I know a lot of my good friends have shut down in this area of their life. They've been so hurt. They've been so scarred. They've become so skeptical, so jaded by romantic relationships that they have given up on this idea of an ideal relationship, of a perfect partner or perfect for them.
Right.
And my word to you is please stay in it. Have that faith. You know, one of the things we learned is it's not a black or white thing. Am I a faithful person or not? A lot of times there's areas in our life, like if we have different tanks for each area in our life, how much faith have we filled up in that tank? Right. And so sometimes we discover areas in our life, like romantic relationships, that are really lacking in that faith. How much faith am I putting in God to make this work out for me? And so this third point of when your happiness depends on a partner, you're selling ourselves short. If you're feeling that feeling where I need that companionship right now. I need somebody. There's so much chaos in my life. There's so much chaos internally that I just need that person to help me get through it. We really encourage you to turn inward, to hone in on that vertical relationship with God, and you're just going to be so much better off. That's all I can say.
And for me, it's like this idea of your happiness depending on you. I think that's the key point from that point, is when your happiness is dependent on someone else, you're essentially setting somebody up for doomsday, right? Because we are fickle as people. So I might make you happy one day, I might make you want to scream the next day. So when you look internally to ask yourself, what makes me happy? Like, I don't think we should get into a relationship with anybody if we don't know what makes ourselves happy.
Right.
Like, what did it take to cheer you up? What makes you sad? What makes you uncomfortable? Until you're able to answer those questions for yourself, I think it's going to be very hard to be able to answer that question when your spouse shows up, your future spouse shows up, and they're asking you those very same questions, right? Because ideally, and we talked about this in friendships, that you have reciprocity, and within that you have someone that you want to help grow, help you to become a better person. So you have to be able to answer all those questions for yourself. Yeah. And I just want to quickly put up a resource, How to Love. It's written by a Buddhist monk, and it was a really great book for me because it helped me to think about what are the 4 elements to love. So he talks about loving kindness, talks about joy, but just some really hands-on short parables and stories to help you to think about how are you loving yourself first so that you can then give that love, that kindness out into the world to whoever that person may be.
Yeah. You hear the theme through it all. It's the inside-out journey. It's the freeing of self in order to go out and free society, or in this case, freeing of self so that you can go and have a truly free, a truly fruitful relationship. We hope some of this has reached your heart, if not all of it. Reach out to us. Please engage in dialogue. Let us know your thoughts. You can find us anywhere online at Be Free Show. Until next time, we love you and be free.